So it's great to see you again. And we were just talking offline about how when your last time that we sat down and we had conversation, we were talking about how your experiences were when you were a child and as you were growing up, and you had the experience that I recall, at least that stood out to me, of your grandmother. And was it like, what were they called, like the robbers or somebody who was running away at that time and found refuge in your grandmother's,
Yeah,
you
not
know,
even a robber, just an innocent person in the wrong place at the wrong time.
wrong place at the wrong time. But, nevertheless, on the other side of the law, it seemed, and
Yes.
running, for cover, and found cover and refuge in your mom's and your grandmother's like kitchen. When you're there, you're watching this, and, it's one thing to have this sense of, compassion and empathy for people when, you're a third party to a situation. You're removed from it, detached from it. But it's a whole other when you are being directly impacted now and you stand to lose something by being compassionate, and something's now on the line. There's like skin in the game, right? Everybody changes a little. And you saw that a level of compassion that stays constant, even in the moment where, you're directly involved. And then probably the more intense one was like when you were at work that time and held up at gunpoint, and you talked about having this sense of calm, which some would say is like rooted to courage, but I see it more rooted to compassion. Or maybe it's the same thing now, and they feed off of each other. And then there you are, the very one who is the aggressor, the very one who is the oppressor, it seems in that case, becomes the subject of your compassion. And, do you feel like those kind of experiences maybe really like intensified and really played a role in shaping sort of who you are and how you are?
Yeah, for sure. But I also think, first of all, I believe compassion can never have negative consequences, ever. Nothing bad can ever come of having compassion. It's just such a beautiful, energetic emotion that exudes out of a person. So that's the first thing that I want to say. But I also think that the key for me is you can be compassionate. Like in that situation where there was a gun to my head and it was life or death, literally. I could get killed or I could survive. That was it. The key in bringing the compassion together was forgiveness. When I looked at him and whatever the outcome was going to be, I knew I was going to be okay, but whatever the outcome was going to be was complete forgiveness. There was no agenda. I wasn't saying, I forgive you, so save my life. It was like authentic from my heart, unconditional, whatever happens, I forgive you. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the key. I think unconditional forgiveness in a situation.
I read something recently that spoke to empathy is to feel someone else's pain and to put yourself in their position, but compassion is empathy and mobilized. It's empathy with an action or a solution. And so I feel like in hearing what you're saying is, compassion, the act of forgiveness within compassion is the action, right? That's the action or the solution, whatever it is. So yeah, it just kind of pieces together. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, in that situation. And for sure, were those experiences I had did that form my foundation? And I think I said this before, or I've said it a lot, but particularly that one where I forgave the gunman, I believe it was a portal to who I was meant to be. It was the door opening saying, okay, now we can show you the way of where we always knew that you were going to go, if that makes sense. I think all of my past experiences, all of my past lives, all of my past everything culminated in that moment. It said the door is opening for who we know you are, who you want to be. So I think the foundation was there. The door just had never been opened that I could actually walk through it. And I think that was allowing me to walk through.
So that's interesting right there that you say that, because, that's the breakthrough, right? And before the breakthrough takes place, you're still standing on the other side of that, let's just say the door. The door opens. And this happens for many of us, I think, and this is the point of what we're here to talk about, really. is that quite often people want to have a breakthrough. It's a good thing waiting on the other end. We hear about it all the time. But when we're standing on the other side of that door and we have to choose to walk through that door, we have to choose to act on that breakthrough, right? The breakthrough doesn't come to us. We got to go to it, right?
Yeah.
When you saw that moment and you say you had these thoughts of, well, everything that has happened in your past brought you there and it's culminating, still there had to be a feeling of unknown on the other side of that.
But it didn't matter. Oh, you mean in the moment, or do you think when sort of that opening happened for me, but I didn't realize it had happened to me until years later?
Yeah, it's a retrospective moment.
Retrospect and introspection, I can go, you know what, I think that was the moment. That was the moment. And like, I've just had the most mind-blowing aha moment while I was listening to you. Why do I go out and sleep on the street sometimes? Or why do I decide to camp out in the backyard? Because I believe you have to understand another person's story. And I think it's always the coming back. I always have to come back to that moment of complete empathy, understanding, and forgiveness. So I think that is the foundation of that formed the foundation. I always want to try and understand someone who I can't possibly understand because I don't live on the streets. I don't beg for money. I don't have to prostitute myself. But I want to understand.
You just reminded me of a time I was speaking to a person who's a lawyer, and she was talking about how she was in family law, and she was looking to potentially, it's like, I don't know if this is for me, this is what I want to do. The things that they see and deal with in family law. And then there was a larger question, like, is law even for me? Like, what will make me happy? All those questions. And she was standing at the cusp, at the edge of making a decision, but not yet wanting to take that next step, not ready to take that next step. And we were talking about, like, well, what's the way? What's my next move? What's my next step? And I tend to say, like what you just said, which is, performing exercises is what I call them. So to me, like, when you go sleep in the street, you have a home, but you go sleep there. Why? I feel like it's an exercise. You exercise these other areas of your compassion and who you are. And by exercising those and strengthening those, let's just call them muscles, right? They prepare us for those times that we're really going to need to know, need to understand, need to empathize, need to have compassion, need to forgive, all these things. But through exercise, so I told her, I said, maybe you need to think about doing something where you have to push through. So what's your limit on push-ups? I just started somewhere random, and she's like, I don't know. I said, go find your limit and then do one more. Get yourself to do one more. Or, in my case, what I did is I jumped off a bridge, like bungee jumped. I felt like I needed to face fear.
That would do it.
I'll go seek a thrill or seek a fear, and I'll go, let me exercise that side of me. Yeah. So, these all seem to be like, these experiences seem to be exercises almost. Exercises for you to develop your compassion and, like you said, to bring it all through. But before we go on, I wonder, because this is all about breakthrough and we really want to understand this part, is that before you can do it for others, do you feel though you need to do it for yourself first?
Forgiveness, compassion, empathy, kindness, love, friendship, grace. Yes.
Yeah.
And so you seem like
your best friend. The one thing I've always said is, if I had to meet me, I'd want to be my friend. Like, I'm a good person. I'm a fun person. I'd want to be my friend. How many people would say that about themselves?
Yeah. Well, I actually use that as an exercise sometimes in counseling, especially when I remember I was talking to this young man, and he was telling me about his girlfriend's negative self-talk, particularly around her body image. And we see this, unfortunately, a lot with our youth. And he's like, I see this and I don't want to shame. He was very aware of not wanting to shame her about that because, she really is expressing how she's feeling. And so I said, well, why don't you just say, hey, don't talk about the girl I love like that, and just kind of make it lighthearted, but really send a clear message. And he's like, you're right. He's like, she wouldn't talk to someone else that way. Why is she, or about someone else that way? She's so loving, but she talks to herself that way. So it's a really good exercise at flipping the switch, because we all do that. We all have this kind of like negative self-talk that we just tear ourselves apart so much, right? And if you're more on the perfectionist side, it's even worse. So yeah, there's a lot of validity to that exercise.
Nicolle, do you ever feel like, I mean, if we meet you today, obviously we would say, yeah, Nicolle is Nicolle's best friend. She likes herself. She's, all that stuff. But did Nicolle ever have moments where she had to work on liking herself? She had to work on forgiving.
I knew I hit Mohammed because I was going to make that distinction. Okay,
well,
so so
you need to be relatable, to be honest, right? And if we're going to talk to people, and our viewers are going to look at it going, Nicolle doesn't get me. Nicolle's never had my problem.
Yeah.
When you look at Nicolle, she's got it put together, and there she is changing the world. But before she could change the world, she had to do something for herself. What was that, and where was she then, right? And I think before we get to the other part, because I really want to get to the stuff that you're doing today, which is amazing. It's groundbreaking. And I want people to know that they can do these kind of things coming from a starting point, but they don't realize your starting point. A lot of people don't realize beneath the iceberg, right? Beneath the tip. And I really want to give us some insight into that, if you're willing to share.
I'm willing to share, but what I want to go back to is, yes, I mean it in the most humble of ways, but I do like myself, and I do want to be my friend. Like I think I'm a great person. That's not to say that I think I'm a great person all the time. I have self-doubt and self-loathing and self-hate and all of those things that happen.
Really?
Yeah, of course. And that's why these things are practices, right? That's why metta, which is loving kindness. That's a practice. That's why compassion is a practice. That's why when you do these meditations, it's a practice. It's because we are always growing. We are never, overall, I think I'm a great person. But that's just like looking at a kaleidoscope. The picture overall is beautiful. I love that picture, but there are prisms inside of there that are fractals and fragments and broken and when you look in deep, those pieces need work sometimes. And I'm not that great on self-love. Overall, I like who I am, but I'm not that great in self-love. And there's an inner critic inside of me and all of these things. The difference is I know when the stories are starting and they're starting to make me feel bad, I know how to say time out.
Yeah. What's the story I'm telling myself right now?
So talk about, can you explain that a little bit in better? Yeah, I don't need to have like details of the situation, but how can you tell? Like, what does it feel like? What do you mean when it starts feeling like?
I've been a mindfulness practitioner for a long time. This is what mindfulness is all about. So mindfulness is knowing what's happening in the body and mind at any given moment. So it's that awareness, momentary awareness. I can be lost in a story and suddenly I realize my heart is like feeling sore, or maybe I'm tingling, or and then I'm aware of that. And then I went, I've just been in a story for 10 minutes and I've been believing the story. Particularly as lawyers, we all have the woulda, coulda, shoulda. If you have an argument with somebody and then you're driving home and go, I should have said that next time they happen. and you do that. Where you are is you in no man's land, because the argument is done. So it's all happening over here, and this is where all our problems start. Yeah. Because we start believing that. But if we're able to say, whoa, hang on a second, I'm just having an imaginary argument with an imaginary person who doesn't even know I'm arguing with them at the moment. Mm-hmm. But what I know is I'm getting angry. So when Mohammed says, hey, you were 5 minutes late for the interview, I'm going to pound you, because I'm really amped up from the argument I had with the imaginary person on the way here.
Yeah.
So that mindfulness that you're talking about, that's key. That's a huge key to being able to then move forward. Mm-hmm. What do we say? Did you realize, here we are, we all, I think, all three of us here, when we're talking, we practice mindfulness on some level, and we all, there's not one person I've met who doesn't, for a moment forget where they are and loses their sense of mindfulness. So we all do it, but we're aware of how to kind of switch ourselves back, like you just said.
Yeah.
You're like, that's that feeling, and then I say to myself. But what happens is, like, can you go back to a time where you weren't mindful and you didn't even know how to, like, you didn't know that you weren't mindful?
Yeah, I can give you an
Really?
example. Yeah, I can give you an example. It happened just a few days ago.
No.
Yeah. And but the difference is I realized that I lost my mindfulness and I go back and correct it. And that's the difference. It's going back and correcting it, apologizing, being accountable. So what happened, the bank, I've got this retreat happening, and I thought I really need a good credit card because, I don't have a travel credit card, and I wanted to get a credit card. And when I went to the bank, they said, "Oh, we don't do." And I went with my documents and my master business, license and all the things that they usually ask for. And I went into the bank, and they said, "Oh, we don't do this. We don't do it in person anymore. Online. So just call this person. She does our credit card applications. Call this person, and she'll help you out." So I call her, I leave a message, and she writes an email to me, and she says in the email, I received your telephone call or your voice message or whatever. Please will complete the self-net worth assessment form, and once you've completed that, I can see how I can help with your credit card. And I don't know what it was, but something triggered inside of me. And I was like, no, I'm not, you haven't even greeted me as a person, but all you want is my net worth. And then once you've got my net worth, you'll talk to me. And so I wrote this email to her, and no, this isn't good enough. And she called me. And I started shouting at her, saying, "You in the service industry, and how dare you just treat people like a number, and you don't even know what I want this for." And, she was a manager, and she wasn't apologizing to me. She said, "Well, that's how we do it." And she said, "I deal with many lawyers." And this was the next trigger. She said, "I deal with many lawyers, and they're very busy people, and they don't like telephone calls. They just like emails." So I said to her, "Please don't tell me about lawyers. I train lawyers." And so she triggered me, and I was so mean, and I was so angry. And then my last sentence to her was, "You know what? I'll decide if I want to do business with you or not." And I put the phone down. And I was so angry and so triggered. And then I could hear my thoughts going, "Who the hell does she think she is? And I'm giving them business, and I'm the client." And then I realized, and I felt such shame, because it was, "You better than this, Nicolle."
Okay, so stop right there. You had that moment still. They're right there. Just before that, you felt shame. Like, some people, they don't feel that shame. They're like, "I'm right." And then it keeps going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. And it just spirals. So, like, it's like there's like a gravity to it almost, like it attracts more energy.
Yeah.
And then you happen to at least be in that moment, say, by yourself, that you didn't have another trigger, and people have like 20 triggers coming at them at a time. Like, your kid could have walked in and had put mud on the carpet,
Yeah,
and then it just keeps going. And then there's a phone call from a whatever. And then the call from someone trying to sell you a credit card now. Like, imagine it just keeps going. And that's what I find usually happens out there. People are being bombarded by these triggers constantly. Yeah. Don't get that moment to just...
What I find, like, in that is, because I be that person, I'd have those fights in my head often, right? And I think you tapped into, like, Nicolle's visceral response or embodied response to a trigger was a little bit more subtle, and she's picking up on that. But other people experience it the way you just described it, like really fiery, super. That was me, racing thoughts, racing. And so two of the things that I've learned in navigating this in the journey of mindfulness, and also like helping other people learn it too, is when we have that kind of emotive reaction and we're in these head fights in our head, that is a telltale sign to stop
Ah,
That is the sign. And
okay.
when the story is going in our head is going and focusing on something in the past. So like after that phone call, reminiscing about that all day and just really brewing in that, that's in the past now. So when your brain is fixated on the past, brain is fixated on the future, like I'm going to get them, or next time I see them, I'm going to do this. When you go to that, whether it's out of anger or it could be out of anxiety, we're misaligning ourselves, because we're when we live in the past, we can depression, and when we live in the future, we can invite anxiety, even if it starts as an angered response, right? Because then we're always telling ourselves that story. And one of the things that I when I have the behavior, like I've done the same kind of things on the phone call, and I got off, I'm like, I was such an asshole. Like I was not a good version of myself at all. And I knew it at certain points. I'm like, I don't even care anymore, because I just need to get this done, or whatever it is. And
Right, we justify it.
Right. And then the thing that I've learned in those situations, and then also in like my relationships with people, is when I ever have a conflict, or there's something that's creating a tension, the first thing we always innately do, at least for me, is you look outward and point and blame outward.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I think one of the flipping points is when we feel a misalignment, or there's a conflict or something, we need to look at, okay, what's my responsibility in this?
Yeah.
Because we only have control how we respond. That's it. We are responsible for our behavior. We're not responsible for the circumstances all the time that are around us, but we are 100% responsible how we show up. And that is the work, right?
You know what, Trina, we can say that, right? Like, we need to do this and we need to do that, right? Because that is the right thing to do. But in that moment, if someone were to come up to us and go, look, you really need to do this. And usually there's nobody there to tell you this, because everyone's afraid now to talk to you, including maybe a version of yourself. Like, I don't need to hear this right now. Let me just like bathe in this anger and like, let me just, be
let it finish.
And it doesn't subside right away. But I love what you said, that moment itself is the sign. Right.
And you don't need to get to the self-responsibility. I think just because what you're doing is, if you're learning to ride a bike, you don't learn how to ride a bike right away. You're going to fall off. You're going to get skinned knees. You're going to misalign, literally, not be balanced. This is the same thing. You're creating a new habit. So just the action of when you feel you're dysregulated like that, just to come back to breath and take the pause, that is the first step of the other steps of this growth journey. I feel like that is the first thing people need to do, is that when we're hyperactivated, either anger or really depressive, whichever way it comes out, that we just pause and just try to be present.
Yeah, but you have to have awareness of that. And most people have awareness of that.
Yeah, and so you have, it's the body connection first, right?
Yeah. And so I can you were going back, mindfulness is simple, it just isn't easy. Okay.
Yeah.
And there actually in mindfulness there's an actual term that's called papancha. And
so what was that? I couldn't hear it.
Papancha.
Okay.
It's a Pali term for Sanskrit and Pali, I think. So what papancha means, it's like a continual motion. So what happened, to give you an easy example, this woman said to me, all the lawyers I work with, okay, and what I heard, so what happened is my senses made contact with something, okay, so my sense of hearing made contact with all the lawyers I work with want it this way, okay, so my hearing happened, it went straight to thought, and it was, who the hell do you think you are? Then that went to emotion, which was, you've really made me angry. Then my next thought was, like I need to teach you a lesson. Then that went to even more anger. So what papancha is that if you get into this vortex of emotion thinking, and you get stuck in this vortex and you can't get out of it because you can't actually grab hold onto anything. But what mindfulness is saying, that, like what Trina said, it's that awareness in the moment, taking a breath, and that breath stops the vortex just for a moment. That you now have a choice. Do I get out of the vortex or do I choose to stay in the vortex? And a lot of people choose to stay, either they just can't get out the vortex and they ruminate, they regurgitate, they go to sleep with the same thought, wake up with the same thought. Or you can say, I have awareness in this moment to get out. And you might get back in again, but you're making the trajectory of getting in and out much easier. And
so first of all, thank you.
I love that explanation. I haven't heard that before. I love that
word papancha. I actually looked it up, and it's a really cool Pali word for mental proliferation, otherwise also referred as the lion's roar. And it's the snowballing. You use the word when we leave a state of mindfulness, and then we start on one thing, but then it then starts becoming about everything, and it snowballs. So you see, that's exactly the moment that go from whether it's breakdown or breakthrough, and the part that you talk about so well is you talk about that first step. But I think the first step is knowing that you're in the state of papancha, right? Like being aware. Yeah. How does someone who doesn't know, what kind of tool can we give somebody who doesn't know how to tell they're in this state of papancha, right? And I love your explanations is that by being there, you use the word deregulated or those are themselves the tell. The pressure is high, the rate is high. Would you say that that's consistently true about that state?
You know, Trina, because I think Trina used those fabulous words. So I
got all the cool words. You come up with the Pali words now. Oh, that's amazing.
So I think it's being misaligned and all of these things, that's too far in. Like that's a lay person wouldn't say, "Oh, I'm feeling misaligned at the moment." So I think all you have to recognize is, "Whoa, hang on a second, I'm in a story in my head." That's all you have to recognize. Or you just have to recognize, "Whoa, my hands are shaking." Okay, it's just the awareness of your mind or body, and if you can say, "Whoa, I'm in a story," just to stop and go, "It's just a story." It's just a story.
So usually what's feeding that, so what you just said is a story. I'm just going to counter that right now, just for the devil's advocate side, because I remember having the same condition. I tried something else, but along the lines of what you're talking about. But I remember at that time, you could tell me I'm in a story, and I would counter, and I would say, if I were to counter, I would say, this is not a story. What that person did was real. That person insulted me. You see that the feeling. It's real.
But that person's not doing it anymore, right? That person's not doing it anymore. That person's now gone and drinking a Timmy's coffee, chatting to their friends. Right. You are in the story, and you believe in the story. So that doesn't exist now. It doesn't exist. The story doesn't exist anywhere.
It's when you're not in the present anymore. When you're in
What I'm arguing is that injustice or whatever that was served to me, right, hasn't been corrected yet. So
right.
It's still,
so this is where the journey comes too, right? Is taking the self-responsibility. So usually it's like, why am I so offended that this person disrespected me? Why am I so offended that they cut me off? Or, and so there's usually a reason why we're so activated, and there's deeper clinical reasons for those things, but it's the curiosity, right? And so it says more about them that they're disrespectful than it does about you, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
right? Go ahead.
Yeah. So I one of the tools that I use a lot is called the AF, and it was it's not my code. Ajahn Brahm, he's like a rogue, and Ajahn Brahm talks about this AFL code, and it stands for acknowledge, forgive, learn. Mm-hmm. So what happens is it depends on how much inner activism
works. The Australian Football League, that's for sure, right?
No. Could be.
His last football is in the middle.
But this guy's is he from Australia? No, he's not.
He's a monk, though?
I Googled the AFL Code of Conduct, and it was a code of conduct for the Australian Football League. So I just want to make sure we're talking about the same thing.
No. Let's hear the code of conduct. Maybe they talk about it. So there's a difference between, you can say, I feel really justified, and you can acknowledge and go, yeah, I'm acknowledging that I really feel justified and they shouldn't have done that. Or you do it the other way. So what I did when I had this thing with I acknowledged that I was feeling really angry, but I didn't say it because of what she said. I said it because something inside of me was triggered. Yeah. So it was, okay, something inside of me was feeling disrespected. Something inside of me was feeling very small. And she poked at my smallness. And so when I had that acknowledgement, I forgave myself for feeling that way, but I forgave her as well, and was like learning from this. Okay, so what have I learned? I learned that it wasn't her. She had no idea. Maybe she was really being helpful because she works with lots of lawyers, and she thought I'm being helpful by not, having a telephone call that's going nowhere until I have all the information that I need. So she didn't do anything. What she did wasn't to spite me. She didn't do it on purpose. It was my response. It was my internal reaction. So I had to acknowledge that. I had to forgive myself, and I had to learn from that experience. So the next step,
what do you have to forgive yourself for?
I have to forgive myself that it's okay to feel small, or it's okay to get angry with somebody. It's okay to get angry with somebody, but what you do with that anger can be hurtful and destructive. Mm-hmm. And what I did was hurtful and destructive because I put the phone down on her when she was just trying to do her job. So I emailed her back and I said to her, I'm really sorry, we got off on the wrong foot. Can we start over? And now we're having conversations. She was chatting to me yesterday about her father, and she chatted to me yesterday about how she thinks that what I want to do with the credit card probably isn't the right thing to do. And she gave me some great tips and suggestions. But it was in that moment where I said, why was I so triggered? It wasn't her. I had to acknowledge within myself that something wasn't right. My smallness, my ego was saying, look, she knows you small. She knows you nothing, you see? And I had to see that. Mm-hmm. And then I had to forgive myself and learn from the experience and correct it.
Do you think this ever happens? So you just gave a scenario. There was another party that was making us feel small, right? What I think a lot of people go through is a situation where there's no other party, that they themselves are making themselves, or they feel themselves. There's nothing else. There's just them by themselves. They're just feeling down. And it's not that somebody else told them something. Their perceptions and perspectives on all these things kind of going on around them. Like, look, people are making money losing. Look, people have friends, I don't. Look, winning lotteries, I'm not. Look, all these things, and then it's the self-talk that they bring themselves down. Like, Trina, you were talking about this, I think, earlier. People, we bring ourselves down. There's nobody else. It's just me, myself, and I. Is it the same process you think you go through it at that time?
You bring yourself down because you believe in your stories. And there are only two types of stories. There's memories, and then there's thoughts about the future. Okay? So when you've got memories, that's where you feel depressed and down and lonely and horrible. When you're thinking about the future, you've got no control over it. So that's when anxiety comes in. So we're either depressed or we're anxious. If we're living in the past, we're depressed. If we're living in the future, we're anxious. So it's only the present moment to say, right now, in this moment, yes, I haven't won the lottery. Yes, I'm feeling down about myself. Yes, all of these things. But in this moment, right now, I'm breathing. And I've got a choice. Do I want to live in the past? Do I want to live in the future? Or right now, I've got a choice to do something that can just start small. It's what I'm going to do is just make myself a cup of coffee and just really be invested in making myself a cup of coffee.
I want to finish off on this one, if you'll indulge me on this. I know we got to get to something, but this is so important because I think we all face it. I wonder if what your thought is on this, but you know, sometimes, for example, it has nothing to do with like circumstances other than what we even created by ourselves. Like we did something intently. Let's just say we were harsh on a relationship and it broke, right? We broke the camel's back on that one. We were the last straw. Now there's no reset button that we can go to fix it, mend it, whatever. There's no alternative. It's done, right? And we now have to forgive ourselves. That you know, or we've done something that we know was it could be something small, like we invested in the wrong thing with a life savings, and our life partner said don't do it, and then we did it, and then now we're like nowhere. These examples we can give where we were the culprits, right? It wasn't circumstance. We were culprits, or we have been culprits, and now we got to forgive ourselves, and maybe even others haven't yet forgiven us. Do you know what I mean? What do you do then? How do you forgive that person?
Sometimes you need help. You know, if it's so big, sometimes you need help, and you need to reach out, and you have to get somebody to help you learn how to forgive yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You learn to forgive yourself, huh? You have to learn to forgive yourself.
Yeah, it's not, none of us are ever taught that. I feel like we're taught the opposite of it. And through, doesn't matter where the person is from in the world. I feel like we all have kind of like operating systems in our heads sometimes. And I just wanted to circle back to the beginning of what your statement was there. Like the comparison, like they're doing this, they have this, I don't have this. And I really seen this come out in practice. And I was reading like research recently, like as of yesterday, and there was, you know, research about, and I've seen this in stories of people who I've talked to that have lived on the streets as well, and then have come off the streets. And so what the research and experiential knowledge concur that is that when you reach a certain level of basic needs, your happiness doesn't increase. So if you have shelter, you have, you know, a stable income to be able to provide yourself, you have food, you know, access to medical, that kind of stuff. Once those things have a baseline of stability for a person, you know, the difference between a person making $40,000 or $50,000 a year to a person making a substantial more, the jump in happiness isn't really that much better. Of course, there's like a caveat of people who get a great happiness from extraordinary wealth. There's research around those people, but for the average people, money doesn't make that much of a difference. It's because the acquisition of things, the material things, doesn't bring happiness. And so that's what the research is saying. And that's what I've also learned from talking to like a man who was homeless for several years in Toronto and in Edmonton. And we had this beautiful conversation, and he just talks about how he still will sleep outside because that's what his body is acclimated to, even in the winter, and he has a home. And he's like, I don't need what I thought I needed before. And he went from, you know, having a lot of opportunity and wealth and then being homeless. Like he's gone the spectrum. And so the research really qualifies for that. So I think it's really important for people to separate happiness and self-worth from material possessions and things and looking at other people, because, you know, social media is a beautiful tool, but it's also created this falsehood that everyone is putting out these perceptions of whatever the most beautiful things are in their life. And they do. We all have these beautiful things in our lives, but the reality is the life is not all of these perfect pictures. It's messy and chaotic, and everyone has horrible things and heartbreaking things happening to them simultaneous to these beautiful things sometimes. And we don't always post that side of life, right? So I think it's really important for people to look at how they're feeling and why they're feeling that way and what they're comparing themselves to and why, because stuff and acquisition isn't going to necessarily bring happiness or invite more happiness for people if they already have like a stable platform.
Yeah. And if I can extend on that, I know we've got other stuff to talk about, but I heard something last night that said basically the premise was comparison is the enemy of happiness.
Yeah, there you go. That's it.
And another thing about happiness is I think we've got it all wrong. Happiness isn't an extended state of being. I'll be happy when, and then I'll be happy forever. Happiness is just a feeling, and it's momentary, because you're happy when you get your car or you buy your house. So happiness is like trying to catch up to the horizon. You're never going to catch the horizon. You're never going to catch happiness. It's just a momentary state of being.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. How when, people have this, it's very common in our culture, this TGI goal. And somebody says, oh, the weekend's coming. And on Monday, it's like, how was your weekend? And they're always either looking forward to the weekend or talking about the weekend they just went by. And 5 out of 7 days are lost. And somebody asked me, how was your weekend? Why would you only have 2 good days out of 7? So you see, it's like, even Trina, you're talking about, sometimes it's cultural, sometimes it's what's going on out there, what we learn to be the norm. And maybe it is the norm. Sometimes people feel like they learn to just beat themselves up, and the norm is not. The norm is to, and actually, speaking of forgiveness and the justice and the legal system now, Nicolle, isn't that the irony, right? Like you go from, these experiences that you have as a person, as a child, you get your qualification now, and you enter into them, this area of law. And I think it's no coincidence, right, that you find yourself there. But not only do you find yourself as a person aspiring to be a professional lawyer, you come into law, and you talk about how, through your articling experiences and your earlier years in working as a lawyer, that the element of compassion, it's interesting, right? Like inside the legislative side of our governance, of our society, you have this legal system. And inside of that legal system, there's this pursuit for justice. But you would say that while there is this need for justice, there's also a need, or maybe a greater need, for compassion.
100%. There is no compassion in the law. And, it's very, stick to the facts. And, I'm an counselor. Compassion is understanding. Compassion is perspective. Compassion. And that's what we need in a law, in law. And that's the one thing that is lacking from the law. And it's the one thing that emotional intelligence and compassion has to come into the law. Fundamental.
Now, before we get to doing, really, there must have been, I never went to law school, but there must have been discussion already plenty of times about, hey, justice or compassion. They are two different things, and you got to have justice, because if we just sit there and are just compassionate, look at all the things people are going to get. There's not going to be enough deterrent to the people who are tempted to do things that are safe. There must have been discussion, the philosophical conversation around that. There has to be a reason why compassion is, according to you, like absent, or that it's too diluted in the legal system that we have today. There must be a reason for that.
I think that we, I read something, and I wish I could remember it 100% correctly. But the one thing that compassion is seen as a weakness in the law. If you're compassionate, it means you're weak. We don't have time. Being in the law is about there's no compassion in fighting, So for me, compassion is about, and I think it's because, I wish I could remember this article, but they were saying, if there are three cornerstones of the state, right? There's the law, and what's the other one? Church, state, and I don't know what the other one is. I can't think. Is it health, medical? I don't know what it is.
I'm drawing a loss.
Okay, but anyway, whatever the third one is, it's very important.
Yeah.
So maybe it's church, government, I don't know what.
You can forgive yourself for not knowing.
I'm going to forgive myself because I'm still going to make a great point. So, but basically, it's very, very structured. So the church is there for spirituality. That's where you get your compassion, your kindness, your spiritual met. The government order, or create your environments in your homes or whatever it is. And the law is there to ensure that rules are made and kept, and it has to be very everything else looks after the other needs. The church will look after state, will look after that, your mental and other well-being. And so the law was, in order for us to be legitimate and scientific, we only deal with the law, we only deal with the rules, we don't deal with anything else, because we've got other things to deal with it, and it will infiltrate our systems. And we have to silo everything. And I think that's what happened, is that all these silos, and people are going, well, hang on a second, I'm a human being fighting with somebody, and you're telling me that I can only think about the law? We have to break down the systems that are silos, break them down, mingle them, and then build them up again.
So if you'll indulge me, I'm going to get to that, but I think there's two steps to get there. The first one is where we are now, which is, surely it was a human being. There were human beings that sat there and wrote the law, right? And surely as human beings, they have compassion. But what you're saying to me is that when the laws were being constructed by human beings who are compassionate beings, right? Who know about compassion, who know about love and that sort of thing, and have feelings and understand. You're saying, about, again, explaining it to me as a layman, right? The reason this was done was there had to be an objective side to everything. And the purpose and the goal, let's just say the intent of the law, was to be completely objective. And that's the silo. No compassion in this. And they say it's not that it's lacking compassion, it's that there's an importance to being objective.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you say with the beginnings or the intent?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
That's a good intention, no?
Yeah,
it's great. And yeah, sorry, I mean to interrupt you. I'm just
no. Like I just want to make sure I understand the beginnings of it, because what you're doing, if we get to what you're doing just to talk about that, I think you got to cover these other pieces.
And we see the same in the medical profession that intersects with law. So I'm like putting on a child protection. We're trained in forensic interviewing and how to gather disclosures and evidence in a way that is going to be presentable to the court, because you don't want to, botch a case because you contaminated the evidence, and that leaves this, vulnerable child in a predicament. You haven't operated in a way that is in the direct application of the law. So the thing of it is like, I've been reading a lot about therapeutic jurisprudence. I just want to share a quote. I just pulled it up. And I think this really kind of pulls together what therapeutic jurisprudence is, which is because there's a lot of unintended consequences sometimes when we don't bring our humanity to the table. Sure. So when you're looking at bringing in a compassionate process into law, this is not something that is new. It's not happening in North America necessarily, but it is happening in other places in the world. An article from 2019, and it's titled and just applications for international law and psychiatry. So this is a statement about it. It says the perception that the task of the court is not only to decide the specific legal issues before it, but also solve the underlying problem that gives rise to the dispute, requires a holistic view of the parties and their relationships and situations. A judgment of the court which takes into account the environment in which an issue arose will have much greater chance of preventing further litigation. And so what that means is if we bring our humanity to the table with the application of the law, we're inviting different opportunities and different conversations that stop that wheel of people circling through the legal system, and looking at and it's differentiation of the application. And so what works for one family in alignment with the law may have unintended consequences for another family that the judiciary may not necessarily have been privy to. In those, it's bringing in those life experiences and the idiosyncrasies of a person's life. So when the application is unfolding, then it takes into account how to invite optimal outcomes for people, rather than reinforcing the same issue that has brought them forward to you in the first place. So it's super exciting that this is happening. And I'm finding there's a lot of conversations happening, at least within Canada, within the communities Nicolle and I are circling right now, which is it's so emancipating. It's so wonderful.
And it's happening, these communities are happening because we realize that the systems are broken and not working.
Okay.
You know,
Right
and
there.
Yeah.
There's this brilliant article that I refer to a lot, just about why don't we have compassion? Why don't we have any of these things in the legal system? This study, and it's called Killing Them Softly. Neuroscience reveals how brain cells die from law school stress and how neural self-hacking can optimize cognitive performance. And basically what this article says is the second you enter law school, while your intelligence might be raised, but your emotional intelligence has been decreased to almost non-existent. And that's why law students and lawyers come out already feeling depleted, not happy human beings, because they've just been trained for the last 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So that's exactly that was the second step, right? Which was, you know, for people to understand really what you're doing, I really want them to understand kind of like how you got there. And the beginning is always, there's good intent in being objective. No one would say there's something wrong in being objective. That's the common ground, right? The intentions are good. It's to be able to govern. It's to be able to keep order. It's to be able to keep a sense, and consistency for people to be able to live, right? And grow and thrive. And then comes the consequences. And I've heard the word being used, unintended consequences.
Yeah.
Right. So what are some of those, you talk about it being, broken and not working. What's the evidence that it's broken and not working? What are these unintended consequences? Can you touch on them a little bit quickly before we get to then, like, these are your whys, right? This is why you're doing what you're doing. And I think we really should talk about that and get into that a little bit. Then you can really set up for really what you're doing, because you got to know why. Why would you call it? Why would you call it broken? What are these unintended consequences talking about? You just talked on one where when kids come out of law school, when graduates come out of law school, my son just graduated this week, still a kid to me, right? But, graduate, they're now lawyers. They're now like these meaningful members of society. They're noble. They wear these cool, and, they've got certifications. They can solve problems out there. They can bring peace. But you're saying that they're depleted. What do you mean?
First of all, the one thing that I want to say about the law is that if you take any countries, it all talks about compassion, being, knowing, their community. All these things are beautiful, and then you have the law, and I think one of the reasons that I wanted to do law is because if we all live really well together and we understand our rules without having them written down, we don't need a manifesto telling us how to do things. But it's when people can't live with the rules and regulations or need guidance, then you have rules. And rules cannot take into effect every background, every single person's identity, every single person's, it just can't. So it kind of sort of has a global, well, people should be like this, so we'll have these rules. And then if you don't conform to those rules, then you're going to get into trouble, and we're going to punish you. And we're going to punish you with the varying ranges of penalties that we've established. But again, we haven't taken into the extreme. You can't say to a drug addict, if you get high again and treat, well, then we're going to throw you in jail, because they're going to do it, because those rules, there's nothing to help them not break those rules. The system is not helping them not break those rules. So I feel law is fantastic, because if we all good law-abiding people, we don't really need the law, because we're just going to do what we have to do. I don't worry about the law.
If you're law-abiding, that implies that there is a law.
There is a law. But that's sort of common sense, right?
Let's call them universal values. I like using
universal values, I think. Yeah. So I think, the law comes in to punish people if you're not going to behave in a certain way.
Yeah. It doesn't deal with the fact that this person's homeless and has an addiction that they can't access proper support to withdraw from. So that's what therapeutic jurisprudence is looking at, okay, he has this issue. Often we see this in family law cases, that they're not necessarily a homelessness component attached to it, but definitely the addiction issues come up. And one of the things I've seen come out in certain orders is, and this is speaking to what you're looking to for that unintended consequence, Mohammed. So the person has demonstrated a readiness to come off of a heroin, that there was their addiction. There's an order made for them to, engage, and then there's also consequences. If there's a child, because I'm usually involved when there's a child, there's a consequence is suspended if a drug screen, if a drug screen is negative. So if a drug screen comes back positive, all access stops. And so all of that makes total sense. Then you go to a level deeper. The unintended consequence could be that this person, works in Scarborough, they live downtown, and the methadone clinic that they have access to that's really available is in a different part. And for them to commute there and participate in the level of treatment they need, they are not going to be able to stay at their job. Or they may want to have an addiction counselor, but there is a 6-month wait list. Or there's a lack of awareness that relapse is a natural part of recovery, because the brain is hijacked by these drugs. It takes at least a month to be able to come to a baseline, to be able to even start to reframe the neural network that's been hijacked by addiction. So just coming at it with an awareness that kind of those pieces involved with addiction, then we can build around them and say, okay, well, what happens when relapse? How can we have contact that is meaningful for the child, and then also safe for the child's parents' journey with addiction? And so that's what unintended consequences are, because we can be putting orders in place, the courts can be putting orders in place that are truly meaningful for the safety of the child and the betterment of the individual. But the system, the real life role play of that happening sometimes impedes people's progress. So that's what we're looking at, is just really using the application of the law, but do it in a way that we're, for lack of a better word, not setting people up for failure. And we really want them to move through this in a meaningful way and heal and get better, because the less recidivism, the better it is for everyone, right? So
would you also say things like, for example, earlier, even Nicolle, you were talking, I think, about this, where just the very way in which we are taught the law, as say lawyers, if they were to go into being lawyers, the way they're taught the law itself, has an unintended consequence. Like you talked about feeling depleted. What do you mean by feeling depleted when they come out of law school? And I don't just mean from the bank account feeling depleted, but that's another story. But feeling depleted emotionally and perhaps consequences of feeling. And are they taught this? What do you mean? How are they taught this? Or is it just in pursuit of being perfectly objective?
They're not taught any of these things. Taught to be lawful soldiers and to advocate vehemently for whatever you have to do, win or lose. That's really how we're taught. We try to get more integrative practices. There's a whole movement called integrative law, where we say in order for a system to work, we have to integrate therapeutic jurisprudence. We have to integrate mindfulness. We have to integrate environmental, all these things. We have to integrate them. So, this is the community that I'm very big in, and a huge part of my life is bringing integrative law into law schools. But I want to go back to why does a lawyer recently, graduate feel depleted, and there are. I'm not going to go through all of them, but basically there's almost 7 separations going through law school. And once they come out, even just as a graduate and as a new lawyer, where now this is where their foundation, they have these 7 separations of self. And the vision is they come out of law school, and maybe they went into law school feeling, I know I felt this way, but I went into law school completely. I was going to be there people, and I was going to advocate, and I was going to do all this good work, and I was going to do all of this stuff, and then through law school, none of that stuff. The values and the reason I went into law school was that you have to put that aside. So now there's me as a person. That this is why I went into law school, and law school's telling me, but you can't really be that person. So there's a separation of myself, and I have to go, wow, okay, so when I become a good lawyer, then I can bring my values back in for why I did this in the first place. But I first have to pay my dues. So you start separating more and more and more from the reason that you went into law school in the first place. So you have that one separation. Another separation is that you feel that people don't understand you. So you can't say to somebody, it's really stressful being a law student, or it's really stressful being a lawyer. They go, what do you mean? It's one of the best professions in the world to have. You dress well, and you're going to earn well, and you're going to do all of these things. And it's like, I can't complain to somebody about my stress because it feels like I'm being ungrateful and people don't understand me. So now you're very isolated. So there's another separation that you feel. Then there's a separation. You go into a law firm and you don't, like I did, you feel like a triangle in a round pigeonhole, because you know this is an environment that makes you feel good, and yet it's an environment that you have to be in. So now there's a third separation.
Why wouldn't you feel good in a law firm when this is what you worked to get into?
Because you don't know what a law firm is when you're a law student.
What is a law firm? What do you mean? What is it? It's a mystery now.
Yeah, so I think people think that they want to be in, these fantastic downtown law firms, and you're going to wear the cool clothes, and you're going to have prestige, and everyone's going to make you feel fantastic. And you go there, and for the most part, they make you feel terrible. They make you feel small. You're working these long hours. You've got no support. You're looking at around with everybody flourishing, and you think, I'm the only idiot here who doesn't understand anything.
Isn't that part of the Navy training, SEAL training that you get? Isn't that why they do that?
But why should it be? Why can't you mentor? Why can't you incorporate?
Isn't that how you get opened up for the challenges that lie ahead?
Do you think it makes you a better person when somebody treats you badly?
Well, you grow thick skin, no?
There was this, yes, you grow, I don't want a thick skin, I want a supple skin. So
I'm just talking about the intentions as to why they are the way they are. I mean, this is what I heard.
100, there's this Facebook group that I'm part of, and this one person wrote how they received a really, really nasty email from a very senior lawyer. They're junior, from a very, very senior lawyer that kind of was a, you should be going back to law school. Like, how could you have written this correspondence to me? But not only did this person write it to them, CC'd 25 other people on this email. And so she wrote and said, what do? I feel I have to protect my boundaries. If he wants to guide me. Maybe I didn't know what I did was wrong, but don't tell other people, And so we started this whole conversation and so it was, I think we've spoken about this before. You've got your role models and your anti-role models. So use this person as your anti-role model, so that when the same thing happens in 20 years' time and you face with the situation that now this person, you can do something with compassion, kindness, integrity, and you're going to be a much better mentor and role model than this person who just made you feel small.
Let me ask you a question, because there is the law that we were talking about, then there are just the culture of law firms and the whole legal industry. And that has a whole commercial side to it, right? That's a business. And there are two different things in my view. There is like what the law is intended to be like, and to the intended consequences, and then the unintended consequences of just an objective law. And then there is, how law firms operate and cultures of, how they're going to grow their business. And when you talked about these levels of separations, I think that there's also this this thought that the better you can do this, the stronger you become. And then there's this, there's this feeling of actually achievement when you tear yourself down, your humanity. Not that kindness is weakness, but that, look, you got to be able to put on this armor and not be yourself, because it's a jungle out there and that's what you're up against. So that it's like this feeling that, look, we're doing this to prepare you. And it's like hard love, if you will, to try and get us there. But then it has unintended consequences. It always comes back to that. Mm-hmm. So carry on, because you did get yourself into, I don't want to say trouble, but like you felt yourself out of place, right? While you were articulate.
Yeah.
And then, because these are all thoughts and experiences that lead up to like what you're today. And now we're approaching kind of like the things that sort of motivated you now, because now you're seeing what's happening in law school, you're seeing what's happening in law firms, and you feel that there needs to be a change because you're seeing lawyers being down. Trina, you talk about lawyers requiring all kinds of coping mechanisms, anything from, drugs to therapy to whatever. And it's no secret, it's happening like rampant, to depression.
There's a lot of heart issues. I'm seeing like blood pressure issues.
Yeah, I'm sure if somebody were to go look this up, like the stats are pretty obvious, right? On this
I think
stuff.
Suicidal ideation is higher. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think lawyers have passed dentists now for. It used to be dentists. Yeah, dentition with of persons who die by suicide, and I think lawyers are now the first.
Well,
so these are like
everything.
Yeah, so like now it's just about the system. We can do better for the persons we're in service to that are navigating the system, but also better for the persons who are advocates and working within the systems, because impact of vicarious trauma, burnout, or compassion amongst people in this discipline.
So I love how you use these terminologies, and they're so meaningful. Like, wow, I bet you when you say compassion fatigue, a bunch of people can nod their heads and say, "Yeah, that's what I'm feeling right now. I'm feeling compassion fatigue."
Yeah, it's a real thing. It
requires me to have no compassion, and I want to have compassion. So
I don't like the word compassion fatigue, because passion is the most positive emotion you can ever have. You can never get burnt out from compassion.
Oh, I think what she meant was like lacking compassion.
Yeah, but
I understand that there's a misconception about the meaning of it.
Because you feel so much compassion, you feel burnt out, but it's emotional burnout.
Yeah, you're burnt out, but it's
okay. That's how I read it.
Yeah, so it presents itself as almost like an indifference. Like, what's the point? Nothing's going to work anyway. It always goes like that absolute thinking. Always, never. This never happens. And you just kind of have a hostility almost toward your occupation.
Someone once explained it to me.
You feel that, Nicolle?
But with emotional burnout, I really need to start writing things down. But they said emotional burnout is when your emotional output is not being met by your emotional input.
Yeah.
So you've been there. You had all these experiences, and you talk about the triangle and the square, peg. Now you get to a point. What made you feel like? Because a lot of lawyers go through this, and then they just go. Either they go, this is just how it is, and assimilate, because they're now what they say in poker, they're pot committed. They've put so much in to being a lawyer. This is what it means. This is what I signed. I signed up for this. So let's just go with the flow. Or they exit. And you didn't go with the flow, and you don't want to exit.
Yeah.
But what makes you think that you're gonna be able to spot it? And so you decided to start practicing a certain way first.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that.
Well, when I was in South Africa, and I was coached out of law school, and I started my own practice, and it wasn't how I wanted to practice, and it wasn't what I wanted to be. But yeah, I had to do it, and you know, this is what it was. And so when we emigrated, it was like, I'm done. I don't want to be a lawyer ever again. Like, this is not for me. It's not what I signed up for. I sold my soul to the devil, and I don't like it. And so when we emigrated, it was like, oh, this is such a great opportunity for me to start a whole new career, brand new, be what I want to be. You know, I want to be an interior decorator, or I'll do something, which I couldn't be because I suck at math, and apparently you really need math to be an interior decorator.
I didn't know that.
About space perception or something like that. I don't know. So you need to know how big the couch is before you put it in there.
You can't get it in the door.
So, but I realized, you know, in being in Canada for was just coming on 2 years, that I loved the law, that I loved being a lawyer in my blood, and I really wanted to be a lawyer. And so that's when I decided to become a lawyer in Canada. The difference was I was older, and I had I knew that the way I had practiced was not the way that I was going to practice this time. So I had been given an opportunity, and the biggest gift by Canada saying, we don't accept you the way you are. You have to reconvert and redo you. I knew the type of lawyer that I wanted to be. Most people don't know the type of lawyer they want to be. They might know what type of law they want to practice, but they don't know the type of lawyer they want to be. I knew what type of lawyer I wanted to be, and I
let you say it that way. It's not just the kind of law you want to practice, but the kind of lawyer you want to be.
Yeah, that's
Very
key.
That's key.
Because that's how you can decide whether you're going to straight. So you know, that's when I did become a lawyer. It was, I'm not going to litigate. I'm going to do mediation. I'm going to do collaborative law. I'm going to do holistic law, not HO, holistic, holistic, WHO, holistic, so that I can try and take the whole person who comes to me and see their whole situation and work differently. And I didn't. And I felt like I was swimming, you know, against, you know, I was going upstream and everyone's going downstream, but I knew that's how I wanted to be, and that's how I did it. I created a successful practice. And when I say successful practice, I want everyone to understand that everyone has got a very different version and definition of what success is. Mm-hmm. Success for me was never being a millionaire. I got there, that was fantastic, but that wasn't what I strove for.
Yeah, your idea of success was being able to be the lawyer you wanted to be. Yeah. And you stayed, your definition of success is that you stayed true to that, and you managed to, and so the law does allow, as it's constructed right now, allows you to do that, allows you to be that.
It allows you to be that, but you're not going to make as much money later, pouring fuels to the flames and making conflict bigger.
Well, you know, mechanics have been accused of doing that, and it's more of a, you know, it's like, you know, there's no problem there, and now there's a problem because, you know, they created the problem. And we all know about that sort of way of being able to increase your business. And that's what I mean by the commercial side of the law, right? That they are businesses, and when the business mind takes over, and that is the mind that is entrusted with also carrying out, you know, the law, well, something's going to give. And it's pretty obvious that that's more commercial interest being met versus you, which is more like, no, I want to make sure that I'm like you said, I'm dealing with the law holistically. So you're successful and you found that that you were able to establish your practice doing that, but you have to give up the idea of being the millionaire that's gonna then bring. And so then you started something called, is it Lotus Law? Is that what you, or yes. Is it, what was it? Earth New Lawyer? Like, is that like, is that now like when you're getting into now working with lawyers specifically? Because you found that you could impact a few people this way, but you could impact a whole lot of more people if you worked with lawyers instead of clients. Is that kind of like how you thought about it?
Yeah, so I created Lotus Law in 2018, a slump, and I say I don't know what time management is. I don't think anybody knows what time management is, because we can't manage time, but we can without time. Time that is. I was feeling guilty when I was at work that I wasn't at home with my kids. Then when I was at home with my kids, all I was thinking about was what I had to do at the office, and then kind of wanted to shove the kids away so I could just quickly get to the office, and no, there was no balance. And there were certain things happening in my life, and I didn't like the way that I felt. And then I went to check with the Law Society to see, as a lawyer, do you help or do anything? And I found a few articles, but it was like literally took like hours of getting into the belly of the Law Society's website, looking for mental lawyers wellness articles, and they were just articles. It was like whole to me, and so
unintended consequences.
Yeah, the consequence is what I decided to do about that, because I was vulnerable enough to say to fellow colleagues, wow, I'm feeling really stressed, and how are you feeling? And they all said, oh, we feel these sole practitioners. We all feel the same way. We can never go on vacation because we are our practice. So the second we go on vacation, we have to bring our work with us, or we have to know that nothing gets done for 2 weeks, and we're going to have angry clients. And so we can't ever go away, and we can't do. And so there was so much stress. And I said, what if I could find a solution? And they said, if you find a solution, we'll be on board with you. Started looking to,
who said we'll be on board?
Every lawyer that I was talking to said, if you can find, and it's funny because they all say, yeah, if you can find a solution, like we'll be there, like we need this help, we want all of that help. So I went out, I found a solution. I spent 2 years studying and doing courses and getting certified. And then I came back and I said, I've got a solution. They said, no, we're too busy.
Yeah. That's it. You can take the horse to the water, right? Or you can't sometimes. Sometimes. That's exactly what I found, and I agree with you wholly that people talk, and lawyers included, about wanting a better outcome and so on and so forth, and when you finally went and you finally don't take. Anyway, we can talk about why that is, but I'm more interested in what you're doing, and so I love that you're doing it. You went, you figured it out, and what did you figure out? What is it that you?
So I started getting involved in mindfulness and so I first did the first thing I did is I thought, okay, I'm going to do a 6-week mindfulness course, and then I'm going to know mindfulness, and then that's going to be fantastic. And I did the 6-week mindfulness course, and I was still more confused about what mindfulness was. I wasn't enlightened at all. I was just completely confused because they kept telling me it's about suffering. I was like, no, I didn't. And because I'm a lawyer, I think I'm better. Like, even though I'm maybe a more humble, or I thought I like the idea of me being more of a humble person, I still have been going, I'm a lawyer, I'm smarter than most of you. This stuff is just like for people with real problems. You don't understand my problems. And that's why mindfulness didn't work for me in that 6-week course, because I was closed-minded to it. It was like, I just want to get enough tools so that I can go and teach people with the tools they've given me. This is so personal and experiential, and it's a practice. And so a lot of the times I'll speak to lawyers, they go, oh yeah, we've read like 30 books, and we've read everything written by the Dalai Lama, and we know Pema Chodron is like, we on her Facebook page, and I consider myself a great cook because I've read 30 cookbooks.
Oh, beautiful.
Mm-hmm. And they go, and I said, do you think I'm a great cook? And it's like, well, no, you have to learn how to cook. Well, exactly. I can have read 40,000 books on cooking, but that doesn't make me a great cook. And that's,
so you think it's possible to be a lawyer and not be mindful?
Say that again?
You think it's possible to be a lawyer and not be mindful?
Well, I don't know what you mean by mindful, because it's mindful of sort of saying, I'm mindful of the fact that you're a busy person, or I'm mindful of the fact that you've got other clients. So, mindfulness, it's a very simple definition. There are lots of long definitions, but mindfulness is knowing what's going on in your body and mind at any given moment. So what I teach lawyers in mindfulness is when you get that email and you suddenly realize that you're so angry, just notice the anger, because it's a simple truth. The email hasn't made you angry. Anger has just arisen within you as a result of what your eyes made contact with. That's all that happened. Your eye made contact with an email. That's the truth. Then you proliferated your stories. Just understand that. And so what I teach is mindfulness in everyday life. Just having awareness, not being mindful of, having awareness of what's just happened inside of me right now. What sense made contact of my 5 senses? Which one made contact with something that caused a reaction inside?
And so how do you think that will translate for lawyers?
Because they start just having an awareness of themselves, and then a lot of my law students have come back, and their greatest success story was I was on the telephone with counsel, and they're looking at me, and they started they were personal with things, and they said, Nicolle, I realized there was so much anger inside of me, and they said in the past I would have either just put the phone down on them, or I would have just started screaming back. And they said, but I realized I felt this anger inside of me. And just in that, to them, you know what, I think our conversation's not being, not sort of, is not helpful to any of us right now. Maybe we should just cool down and we can continue this conversation tomorrow, or we can do something else. And they said, I would never have done that before. And you only need one person in a room to be mindful to change the entire energy in a room. And so this is what I'm teaching lawyers, is to have that awareness in a moment. So those are the stories.
And the other, sorry, I just want to interject too, because she's left out a huge project that she's with her partner in this venture of compassionate integrative process into law. So that's something that she's looking at that's going to bridge. It'll be trauma informed. There'll be a trauma informed piece of it. But then when it's really an immersive experience is what she's presenting, because you're going to get the trauma informed knowledge and the applicational awareness of what that looks like for the people we're in service to, and also for ourselves. But then she'll be unpacking some of these things, like what does self-care and self-responsibility, self-accountability look like? And so that's some of the knowledge that she's going to be bringing into that training as she initiates this alternative resolution process for within family law. It's just starting within family law. So it's a really nice gateway, I feel, the project she's bringing forward, because it is speaking to all the concepts that we've gone through most of this discussion with therapeutic jurisprudence and looking at differentiation, not necessarily cherry picking the law is still going to be the law, but the application of it, of how it rolls out, will be a little bit different. And I feel, what she and her partner are doing is really quite groundbreaking in the sense that it has beautiful applications for criminal law, for other courts, because the only diversity we see within the court system at this point is differentiation for children and differentiation for persons with disabilities or severe mental health issues. So this is a differentiation for all, and rec will have. So that's my sense of your project. I think it's a huge thing.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's great to kind of see like how you got here, why you got here, and what's going to fuel it. This is not just something you woke up and said, "Oh, this would be cool to try." You have a lot of reason now to be so committed to this, and there's such a need. So when there's such a need, such a gap, level of motivation, and you're so invested, it's bound. It's bound to succeed. It's not a question of if it will succeed. It's successful now because of all of these reasons. And it's exciting to see this kind of coming around, because in the area of law, and even in the business of lawyering, right, there's also that aspect that has to be, considered, and it has to be satisfied. Otherwise it won't take, it's a market question. It's a market question, right? Yeah. And from a marketing point of view, and this is kind of like my angle on things, right? It's like the business angle, will lawyers and law firms that are in the business of lawyering, will they see this as valuable, as a way to be able to, through compassion, through therapeutic jurisprudence, do they see this as a greater level of quality to their client? And if they can see that as a greater level of quality to their client, there'll be traction. And I think that they would. I think it's outstanding. Just from a business point of view, a great differentiator nowadays, wants to come across as more, compassionate. They want to come across. They're doing things like, call it the 4-day work week, all these things. And they're saying that we want culture to be proliferated in every aspect of what we do, including, our legal department. So the drive is not just coming from inside the legal industry. It's coming from outside the legal industry as well, that there needs to be more compassion, that there needs to be a more sustainable way of doing things. And if we don't do it this way, well, look at what's happening with global warming. Look at what's happening with blah, 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 all this stuff. It all relates. And it's a philosophy. It's a way of approaching it. And I think the way you're going about it is not just because it's going to feel good. It's actually sustainable. It's actually the only way to be sustainable. Otherwise, more unintended consequences, right? So at what point in time are we going to say enough is enough? And there are leaders like you out there, and I'm so excited to see that you're on this venture. And I believe you got it. You're like the perfect to do this. You've got your grandmother's spirit, right? But aside from your grandmother, you yourself, you faced gunpoint, and even at that moment, you didn't lose yourself. And you're also human enough that you can say, look, I have fall down moments all the time. So you can relate to every side of this table. And then you've also got the professional acumen. You've gone through you've gone through the training, you've gone into the law firm, you've been on all sides. Twice. Right?
In different countries.
And so you're ambassador for this. And I love what you're doing. And I'd love in a short while, maybe for you to come back and talk again about like what your experiences have been like and the kind of changes that you've been able to see, maybe even, bring some lawyers with you who have started to, or your students who have started to use this method, right? Or this mode of being able to apply. So you're not really changing the law. You're not really trying to ask for change.
I'm changing mindsets. Like Mohammed, like one of the things like I tell mindfulness actually adds hours to your day. And people like, because if you can stop your stories, and you're not now spending hours and hours not really investing in what you're doing because you're still in the story. If you can stop the story and then just deal with what you have to deal with, you can get it done. And then it's off your plate and then you can do the next thing. And lawyers don't realize that they're spending so much time not being present, they're productive. And so mindfulness creates productivity. I've got nothing to do because I've done everything so efficiently and quickly. And it's like, okay, well, I'll just go sit outside for a while and do something with no guilt.
So I think, obviously it's times that there's going to be the other side. And I think that the other side might say things like, that's a bunch of, it's a bunch of fluff. Like, it's all feely, and we need to. But I think that's really, that in itself is proof of denial of what makes us human beings.
But I love that mindset because that's where I was. Like,
well, I've been there too.
I was the most. I could come up with a million reasons why I couldn't meditate and why it wouldn't work for me, and you have no clue the stress that I'm facing. So I love it when people say that because that's where I began too, and there's a lot of validity for that, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's what tells you there's a need, right?
Yeah.
That's right there. You're like, okay, there you go. Work is not done going. Oh my God, Bob Marley, who said something to that effect when, he was supposed to go on with that whole he was not well, and they said, why don't you rest? And
Oh yes, because
Nicolle, right? He says the people that are ruining the world aren't taking a day off. I
I
can't
think it
take
was
a
right
day
after he was shot. He
right
actually got
after
on
he
the
got
stage, and they were like,
so
yeah,
yeah. So
yeah,
Nicolle, I hope you're well rested up because but like look at just the way that you're doing it. Like you'll stay true to yourself. You won't get lost in this. You'll probably get more energy out of doing something like this because it's so fulfilling. And I'm so glad people like you are out there, breaking through and in areas of law, not really trying to. Again, you're not like you're not saying that it's not working. It says it's going to work if it's applied this way, and
yeah.
that's the breakthrough. And it's not only applied in our personal sense; it's also applied in a professional sense, and now it's being applied to an entire industry. So, just congratulations on all that you've done and on all that you're doing.
Thank you. Oh, wonderful. Thank you, guys. You're cool.
And it's good to, like I said, thank you so much for sharing that story. I think it gives a lot of people insight as to, right from basic things like forget the law system, but just being able to work on things like, you talked about AFL code, that itself is just helpful to everybody.
Yeah. And I think this is a good conversation too, because like you were saying, this is a culture that's in all professions, I feel, right? A culture of, almost robotic kind of showing up to your job and working. And there's kind of a social currency to say, I worked X number of overtime, or I had to cancel my vacation and so forth. And I think we see that in every industry, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work for us as human beings. It doesn't give us optimal outcomes for the businesses or the system within. So I think we're at a kind of a shifting point, hopefully, where we're going to be inviting more of acknowledging what we physically and emotionally need as professionals who are people, right?
Yeah. And it's not just like you just said, there's the professional side and then there's also the person as well.
Yeah, but they're one. You can't separate them.
Yeah. My problem with being alone was I was separating myself.
Yeah.
I can't tell people I'm a Reiki master and I love crystals because that's not what a lawyer does.
Right.
I can't tell them that I talk to God and sometimes he talks back to me, but that's just weird. So I cut all of those things, and when I eventually said, no, but that's who you are, embrace it, immerse yourself in it, it just felt right. And one other thing with the AFL code that is sort of like a precursor to the AFL code is of HALT, HALT. And if suddenly feeling really triggered, is to say to yourself, HALT, am I hungry, angry, lonely, tired?
Mm-hmm.
Because any one of those things, you're probably going to have to employ the AFL code because you've just done something that you need to acknowledge, forgive, and learn.
Yeah, that's a good one. I know the hunger for me, like, I know. I'm like, I got 45 minutes, guys, or the lid is coming off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe that our commercial that works on that or something.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
I'm not gonna get the name out, but
it makes me angry. That's totally me.
Yeah.
But I love how you just talked about like today mindfulness. Really, I think that was the essence of what we find is that your mindfulness didn't just carry you through from the early lesson you had. It stayed with you, and it's like you said, like it's like the happy, explanation that you gave. It's like we're not always mindful, but here's how we come back to being mindful. And talking about things like that, I think really for us. So really appreciate conversation today. And I think we're not done. I think there's more conversation out there.
I love spending time with you guys, and I have verbal diarrhea, so it's a really good combination for me.
Really, like what you're saying. I mean, you're very humble about it, Nicolle. But I think you articulate it in such a way that not just average people like laymen can understand, but also I think a lot of people can relate to you because of your professional experiences as well. So. Thanks for being there with us and part of our community. Really,
thank you so much.
Nicolle.
All right, then.